The AAA gaming industry is creatively struggling, and it's our fault. 2024 was a solid year for games as a whole. We finally got Stalker 2, Black Myth Wukong and Helldivers 2 took the world by storm. Fighting game fans received Tekken 8, I hear about Balatro every other day, and Astrobot was a huge win for longtime PlayStation fans and platformer enthusiasts. Naughty Dog even surprised fans by revealing Intergalactic Heretic Project at the Game Awards. And while all these games are brand new or sequels to long-running franchises, let's not ignore a recurring problem this generation. We have too many remakes. Kickstarted by Activision's monumental success with the Crash Bandicoot Insane trilogy, it feels like every publisher with a beloved or dormant IP is just shooting their shot. The Spyro Reignited trilogy, Resident Evil 2, 3, and 4, Demon's Souls, Persona 3 Reload, Silent Hill 2, Final Fantasy 7, Dead Space, Yakuza Kiwami, and many more classics are receiving the remake treatment. None of these remakes are bad per se, except maybe this one, but every remake we buy or ask for means a brand new IP dies. To understand this, we have to look at modern video game budgets and define the term opportunity cost. Now, we'll quickly cover the Cliff Notes version of this because I've discussed video game budgets, sales expectations, and how games are monetized in my Are $70 Games Enough video. To illustrate why budgets are a problem, let's revisit this chart that I made. The initial goal of this chart was to highlight rising video game budgets and illustrate how many more copies needed to be sold before entering profitable territory. If we focus on the red projected budget column, you'll see how expensive games have become to make, and then there's Black Ops 6. There's an argument to be made that these numbers have grown proportionally with the industry as a whole, but that's a topic for another video. Simply put, games cost a ton of money to develop and even more to maintain if you're a live service game. Whenever a publisher or a studio decides to work on a remake, they're committing resources towards developing the game and marketing it. These funds don't go towards employee bonuses, researching and developing a new engine, new equipment for the team, or working on a new or old IP. An opportunity cost is the cost of your investment in what else can be done with it. Whenever we receive or ask for a remake, a brand new IP dies. While it's great to revisit older games with modern graphics and controls, all of this time and effort could have gone towards a new series we all might be enamored with. And if you think what I'm saying is crazy, I'd argue we'd probably be on Resident Evil 10 or 11 if Capcom hadn't remade Resident Evil 2, 3, and 4. Furthermore, reliving your childhood and or preserving the past through remakes introduces a suite of new problems, with the biggest one being video game preservation. Video game preservation has been a recurring issue that, admittedly, Microsoft, PlayStation, and Nintendo has improved on recently. Nevertheless, there are plenty of games trapped on dead or aging hardware that younger fans just can't enjoy without emulation. The SNES, PS1, DS, and Xbox all have classics that are either inaccessible or too expensive to buy now. Instead of addressing this issue and ensuring everything's accessible, we get remakes as a way of preserving the past, and while this may sound fine on the surface, remakes can vary in quality. Let's look at Metal Gear Solid: The Twin Snakes and Resident Evil 2 2019 to explain what I'm getting at here. In 1998, Konami released Metal Gear Solid for the PlayStation 1 to universal acclaim. Players and critics loved the incredible voice acting, story, and unique gameplay mechanics. Following the success of the original, Konami and team immediately got to work on the sequel. Metal Gear Solid 2 introduced numerous gameplay changes like first-person aiming, much improved graphics, destructible environments, and more mechanics. With the Metal Gear Solid series becoming more popular, I guess Nintendo wanted a version of the game on their console at the time, and so Metal Gear Solid: The Twin Snakes was born. Because Hideo Kojima, the Metal Gear Solid lead creative director, was developing MGS3 at the time, he provided Nintendo and Silicon Knights, the publisher and developer respectively, full creative control of this project, and this would result in a few major changes from the original. In the interest of time, let's focus on the new cutscenes, music, and gameplay changes. The new cutscenes were largely inspired by The Matrix, with many over-the-top action scenes and a lot of slow motion. The soundtrack, one of the best parts of the original, was changed for the worse, and the gameplay introduced a ton of mechanics from the sequel. MGS2's mechanics with MGS1's framework fundamentally breaks the original because bosses, enemies, and overall level design aren't designed around first-person 3D aiming. When the remake released, critics showered the game with praise while the community was stunned by this massacre. Nevertheless, remakes don't always slaughter the original's intent. Sometimes they provide the original development team the ability to reimagine their game on modern hardware. Resident Evil 2 1998 is remembered for being a survival horror classic. The game enhanced the original's foundation with improved level design, a new suite of incredible characters, and a great soundtrack amongst other things. And almost 20 years later, Capcom had the opportunity to reimagine this classic, with their efforts resulting in one of the most praised remakes ever. With modern hardware, improved voice acting, and almost 2 decades of survival horror game design behind them, Resident Evil 2 2019 removed the fixed camera angles, features new music, puzzles, and, well, I mean, you have eyes, look at it. When looking at the narrative changes, the new camera perspective, and all the new gameplay refinements, Resident Evil 2 2019 is a fundamentally different game from Resident Evil 2 1998. And while I and many others obviously love the remake, it doesn't replace the original. Resident Evil 2 1998 has that late 90s game design with mandatory ink ribbons, fixed camera angles, campy voice acting, and arguably a better soundtrack, if I may say so myself. Although both of these games have similar locations, characters, and plot points, they're 2 entirely different experiences. And this applies to the Silent Hill 2 remake and many other reimaginings that we get today. Now, to be clear, there are a ton of remakes that I really enjoy. Artists wanting to revisit their old work is something I can relate to, like I literally can't watch some of my first couple of videos. So, with remakes running the risk of not recapturing the original's magic or sometimes being reimaginings, why do we have so many remakes? The answer, and please stop me if you've heard this before, is money. Like, what else would it be? Pokémon Heart Gold and Soul Silver sold 12 million copies. Crash Bandicoot Insane Trilogy sold 20 million copies. Shadow of the Colossus sold 2.4 million copies. Resident Evil 2 2019 sold over 14 million copies. Final Fantasy VII Remake sold 7 million copies. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1+2 sold 5 million copies. Resident Evil 4 2023 sold 8 million copies. Persona 3 Reload, Atlas's fastest selling game, sold 1 million copies in a week, and Silent Hill 2 sold 1 million copies in 3 days. And before someone uses Persona 3 and Silent Hill 2 as evidence that remake fatigue is in full effect, both of these games are much smaller when compared to their competitors. This chart is meant to illustrate that we all buy these games. My theory as to why these games are so successful is that longtime fans want these franchises to return to their former glory, and we're all addicted to nostalgia. While games and media we grew up with have special places in our hearts, the impetus publishers have behind developing these are to make money and gauge overall interest in the IP. We'll get back to nostalgia in a second, but given Metal Gear Solid: The Twin Snakes' mixed reception, using remakes and sometimes remasters may yield mixed results. Games like these potentially cause the IP more harm than good and risk sending them back to purgatory. Now, publishers gauging interest or conducting market research may sound like a noble effort, but let's read between the lines a bit here. While yes, this is happening to an extent, publishers are also holding a lot of beloved IPs hostage. If Resident Evil 2 2019 didn't sell well, do you think we'd get Resident Evil 3 2020 and Resident Evil 4 2023? If Final Fantasy VII Remake didn't sell well, do you think Square Enix would greenlight a 3-part trilogy? The answer for both of these questions is a resounding no. If you don't believe me, EA confirmed the Dead Space 2 remake was cancelled because the original failed to meet sales expectations. And if you think I'm defending Electronic Arts, which like, come on, man. A handful of publishers have wild sales expectations for reboots, remakes, remasters, and re-releases, locking up IPs that fans vocally want back and developers dream of returning to is just sinister. Nevertheless, publishers operate on market data, risk analysis, and forecasted return on investment. All of the data they operate on is derived from consumer spending habits, and since we're the consumers, what does that say about us? When encountering something from our childhood, we're often overcome with this good feeling. It might take you back to your first kiss, your first video game, the first boss you've ever beaten, or something that's left a profound effect on you. When encountering these things, our brain releases dopamine and oxytocin, which, neurologically speaking, brings about this warm, fuzzy, elated feeling that we all love. And unfortunately, publishers and studios realize this. Remakes have been an easy way to monetize and cash in on our emotions. However, due to the frequency of remakes today and publishers revisiting older franchises, longtime series fans have now been conditioned to ask for remakes of classics or can't move on from the past, and it's starting to drive me fucking crazy. Older fans like myself, unfortunately, have this irrational tendency to compare modern games with games we've grown up with. Instead of praising Overwatch for its incredible art direction, storytelling, and interesting world, we call it Team Fortress 2. Instead of praising Titanfall for introducing younger fans to arena shooters, the futuristic setting, and introducing mechs and bots to the high-speed gameplay, it's just Call of Duty with mechs. Instead of praising Valorant for its world, abilities, and characters, it's just Counter-Strike with Overwatch powers, and herein lies the problem. Everything to the vast majority of players is just this derivative experience from their youths. Instead of praising a new IP for revisiting mechanics, creating new characters, or leveraging a new art style, everything is just the same or bad. Instead of writing everything new off as bad, we have to give new things a chance instead of devaluing what the next generation of developers are working on. To be clear, we shouldn't forget about the past and we should be able to revisit it, but artists want to create new things and we have to keep moving forward. A ton of games we love today have DNA from the 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th generation of consoles. Revisiting these games because you grew up with them, or if you're curious how developers got from point A to D, makes older games an invaluable artifact to gaming history. Now, let me know if I'm wrong, but I don't think I shouldn't be able to play the original Sonic the Hedgehog because I wasn't born in 1991 and owned a Sega Genesis. The other thing that we have to remember about games is that new games will always be someone's first. One day when I was streaming on Twitch, one of the chatters said Pokemon X and Y were their favorite because they grew up with it, and after being hit with a geriatric whiplash, it hit me how real and relatable this was. Reading that message immediately sent me back 2 decades ago when my grandma surprised me with a Game Boy Advance and Pokemon Sapphire. I distinctly remember choosing my starter, beating gym leaders, loving the music, and talking about it with my friends at school during lunch. However, the gut reaction from most Pokemon fans when they hear X and Y are overtly negative. Instead of trashing on a game and calling it bad, I implore you to revisit everything from your childhood and tell me if it's this genre-defining masterpiece. And if you sincerely believe everything from your childhood is a fantastic thing, you're either delusional, stuck in the past, or you need to grow up. So, to bring this conversation full circle, how would I go about fixing this remake epidemic that we're in and our crippling nostalgia addiction? Well, unlike my last discussion video, I actually have a few ideas this time around. Before sharing these proposed solutions, I'd like to make a few things abundantly clear. I've never worked in the gaming industry, I have no idea how much these solutions cost, and every game has their own set of circumstances. Some publishers/studios may have lost the source code, have copyrighted materials, the game was built on a dead company's engine, half of the game may be missing, or something else entirely. And finally, these, like everything that I've said in this video, are all my opinions. While none of these proposed solutions may be pragmatic, I think starting a discussion is a good step forward. To begin, let's establish a few key criteria that I believe games have to meet before being considered for a remake. First and foremost, with respect to the current generation of consoles, games from 1 or 2 generations ago should not, under any circumstances, be remade. The Last of Us Part 1, Demon's Souls, and the Dead Space remake, to name a few, are idiotic and stupid regardless of their quality. These games, mechanically, haven't changed enough from 1 to 2 generations ago to warrant a full-blown remake. The most recent gaming innovations we've seen are with the original Call of Duty Modern Warfare's multiplayer, PlayerUnknown's Battleground creating the Battle Royale genre, and Fortnite's Battle Pass prompting every publisher to develop live service games. Outside of these developments, AAA gaming has become stagnant, if not a bit formulaic. When reflecting how little AAA games mechanically have grown over the past 2 generations, I find it hard to justify remaking them. Conversely, these games should receive remasters leveraging modern hardware with all the post-launch content included. My second criteria for remakes is that the only generations that should be considered are the 6th generation and below, since many of these games were products of their time. Back in the day, developers had dreams of bringing their vision to life with more powerful hardware, yet they developed what they could and people loved these games. However, today we have another analog stick, an established third-person camera perspective, polygon count isn't a concern, and most people play games online with their friends. The gaming landscape has drastically changed, and I'm sure developers would like to provide some of their classics with a new coat of paint. If a game from the SNES, Genesis, PS1 era or before receive a remake, I'm never going to complain. And then there's the 6th generation. This generation is strange because I'd argue this is one of the most important times in gaming, and I promise it's not because I grew up with it. While the 5th generation of consoles introduced 3D rendering, it was pretty juvenile. 6th generation hardware by comparison was much more capable and developers embraced it. This would result in games that can be broken up into 2 categories, early generation and late generation games. Early generation games had strange controls, struggled to manipulate the camera, and developers were still wrapping their minds around everything they could do with the new hardware. After developers realized the additional analog stick could control the camera and do other things, the early experimental controls were gradually replaced with cameras and control schemes that we have today. And if you don't believe me, I implore you to play Resident Evil 1 Remake, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1, Kingdom Hearts 1, Silent Hill 2, and Metal Gear Solid 3. Because of these reasons, I think the 6th generation needs to be taken on a case-by-case basis. If the games haven't aged outside of graphics and the controls are close to what we have today, why not simply remaster the game and make it available on everything? Developing remasters of classics, porting games to PC to live forever, remaking games from several generations ago, and ensuring modern consoles have backwards compatibility to preserve history are how I would address today's remake-saturated industry. And before we end this video, I do have one last thing to say. If what I'm saying or anything I've talked about in this video doesn't resonate with you now, it will one day. When you get older, change is scary. Eating different foods, wearing different clothes, meeting new people, trying different games, listening to different music, or anything can feel foreign. And every time we refuse to take a chance on something new, it runs the risk of dying. If we don't try new things or entertain new ideas, everything will become more and more homogenous. Remember that every new movie, album, comic, show, game, anime, or anything else was new at some point. Someone or some people found this strange new thing and gave it a chance. And several years or decades later, they've either failed or are still around. I guess what I'm trying to say is refusing to give something a chance can stop you from potentially trying your new favorite game. Hey, thanks for making it to the end of the video. If you enjoyed the video, I'd really appreciate if you hit that subscribe and that like button. I usually put it in the middle of my videos, but I wanted to do something a little bit different, and honestly, I couldn't find the best time to really write it into the video. But yeah, and be sure to follow me on Twitch if you'd like to catch the show live. And a huge shout out to my channel members and Twitch subscribers for making, well, pretty much everything on this channel possible. And if you'd like to see more content or, you know, get early video access, an exclusive Discord role, and some other nice perks, please consider becoming a channel member. That's always greatly appreciated. A couple of questions for you guys before I go. Do you think remakes are a problem today? Am I overreacting? What do you think of my solutions? What would you change? You know, do you think that 6th generation is also important? I'd love to keep this conversation going in the chat below. And which games would you like to see remade, and which series would you like to see return? A lot of people say Dino Crisis would be cool. A lot of people will say that some of Square Enix's other like smaller games that don't get quite as much love as Final Fantasy and other stuff would be super cool to come back. But yeah, that's really all I got. Be sure to follow me on my socials, join the Discord if you want to hang out, and I will catch you guys in the next one, whatever video that may be.